Post-traumatic stress disorder was first identified by the American Psychiatric Association in 1980 when it added PTSD as a condition in their manual of psychiatric disorders. It was primarily to help veterans coming back from Vietnam to get the treatment and help that they needed. Before that, PTSD in reference to war veterans was considered shell shock and some other kind of specific war-related mental health problem. Today, we see PTSD as a much bigger problem, and it's one that can be associated with any kind of chronic stress or even acute stress that people are exposed to for any amount of time. So it's very interesting how we have been able to identify these issues. So I am very fortunate to have a friend who served 2 tours in Vietnam. He graduated from West Point about a decade before I was born, and he even had served his first tour before I was born. He was one of the first guys to go in with the Green Berets in 1963. And while he was serving, he was awarded 2 Silver Stars and 2 Bronze Stars for his service. So he's a bona fide war hero. His time in Vietnam is easy for him to talk about. He has described to me some actions that would give any man nightmares. Things that he had to do or had happened to him in the conditions that he had to fight under were horrific by anyone's standards. He has no trouble talking about that. However, if I ask him about his first marriage, that's when the PTSD kicks in. Looking backwards at stressful events and how you acted under those conditions is something that can bring about great self-respect and self-esteem, or it can also bring about shame. And so I always approach looking backward at my marriage with a mixture of regret and appreciation. Because although I regret a lot of the things that happened and the way I handled them, I also appreciate the fact that I learned so much from the experience. So my wife told me about halfway through our marriage that she really didn't like being married. She said it wasn't personal, it wasn't something that had to do with me. She just didn't like the whole concept of marriage as a whole. And I get it. She had come from a world where she was a princess. She was traveling all the time. She was performing. She had a wonderful, wonderful life. And it was sort of like the Cinderella story in reverse, in that I took her from this amazing life to one that was kind of servitude, because when you're a mom, you've got babies to deal with, you've got a household to deal with, there's all kinds of stuff going on. So I kind of get her issues and why she experienced them. But at the time, 10 years ago, or 10 years into the marriage, I should say, I wanted to do everything I could to prevent that marriage from failing. And so I committed myself 100% to making sure that it didn't fail. And that meant doing everything I could think of to make her happy. And that was a huge, huge mistake. And if I could do it over again, I probably would, because I am not sure that the lessons that I learned from that were required so much teaching. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like maybe I was slow on the pickup, because it's like I took first grade like 10 times in a row, It's like, what the hell? So when I look back on that time and I try to figure out, what was I thinking? Like, why did I fight so hard to keep that marriage? Why did I put myself through all of that stress? Why did I spend all that money? Why did I lose 10 years of my life in this futile fight to maintain a marriage that was doomed? And I knew it was doomed. I almost knew it was doomed from the beginning on another level, but that's another story. And I can only imagine that it had something to do with my preconceived ideas about what marriage should be and what a man's role with a family is. And I look back at my own experience with my own parents and their split up and the way my own father acted and all that, and the example that maybe they set for me in a relationship and all that stuff. And I think that obviously played a role in it. And I look at my earlier relationships, and and I know it's hard for you millennials and Gen Zers to understand this, but my generation truly was like the abandoned generation when it came to parenting. Like, our parents did not give a damn about where we were or what we were doing. And the trouble that I got into without their knowledge is epic. It's just almost without explanation. It's just ridiculous. So maybe I was looking for that, that connection, that would, save my soul and make me a whole person, and knowing that that connection was broken, and then the thought of having to start over again was just all too much for me to manage. Maybe that's it, I don't know. But once it was over, oh my God, the relief set in, not immediately, but probably after about 4 or 5 months. And I think that's what you've got to be watching for. Going from PTSD to sweet relief takes a couple of steps. So first, you have to recognize that whatever it is that's causing you the pain is something that you have given meaning to. The event itself happened. Events happen all the time, good, bad, or otherwise. It's only through our belief systems that we give them meaning. And when you give something meaning, it then is going to have an impact on you emotionally, psychologically, and everything else. So when I talk about my friend who's a Vietnam veteran, he had to kill a young woman who had a grenade that was going to blow up his platoon. And he had to do it at close range, and there was an instant, he described, where they had recognition of one another. Their eyes met. She had the grenade. She had already pulled the string on it, so it was a live grenade. And he had his rifle leveled off at her, aimed straight at her head. And he had to make that split-second decision, and he did. But in that second of a second, that microsecond before he pulled the trigger, her eyes met his, and there was a recognition of what was going to happen. It was a brutal, brutal situation, and he did the only thing that could have been done under those circumstances. He does not have any regrets about that. He does not feel any pain about that. And the reason he doesn't is because in his mind, there was no other decision. There was nothing else he could do. So there was no reason to give that decision any more meaning than what it had in that very instant. The meaning that it had in that instant was preservation, self-preservation. His actions were one of a soldier at war, and he has no moral issues with it. Now, my friend is one of the nicest, most moral, kindest people you will ever meet. And if you ever met him in person, there is no way on earth you would recognize him as someone who had been a war hero. There's just no way. He's just too kind of a man. You'd never think he had a violent bone in his body. But his ability to handle these situations that he's described to me with such ease is remarkable, because a lot of guys coming back from that situation would have suffered a lot of stress and PTSD as a result of it. But he had the ability to remove meaning and his emotional attachment to that moment. And in doing that, he was able to save himself from perhaps decades of therapy and torture and sleepless nights and nightmares and all that stuff, drinking and drugs and all of it. He didn't experience that because he didn't give the event any meaning. He just allowed it to go. And if you're coming out of a relationship where you're suffering from, like I did, years and years and years of stress, of chronic stress, then the way to give yourself relief is to just allow yourself to remove the meaning from that situation. My meaning came from my preconceived ideas about marriage and the way a man's supposed to act in a marriage. And that probably came from me watching other adults when I was growing up and watching my parents and my grandparents and all that, and wanting to achieve some ideal that was unrealistic. You know, everyone's journey is different and you can't judge one by the next. You have to live your own life. And I was holding myself to an unrealistic ideal, and when I felt like I couldn't live up to that, I wanted to redouble. I wanted to double down. I wanted to work harder. It's like, you know, if I'm not doing good enough, I'm not doing well enough, I will just do harder. I'll go faster, harder, stronger, whatever I got to do, I will do it. You know, that was my mentality. But that was not the right mentality for that situation. When a marriage dies like that, and it's clear that it's dying, you've got to consider the possibility that it's a better decision to cut your losses and walk away and recoup your self-esteem, your dignity, your individualness, your true self, and move on with your life. Because doing what I did and going in there and fighting for a decade or longer is exhausting. And you know, I hear some of the women in the comments saying, "Oh, you sound bitter," and I had to really give that some thought. And I don't feel like I'm really bitter now, but maybe just a little bit, maybe just a tiny bit, but not bitter at her, bitter at myself for allowing myself to get stuck in that situation and to act in that way, you know? The only relief I get is I consider that's, you know, that classic, you know, successful people make good decisions. You know, you make good decisions from having experience, and you get experience from making bad decisions. And I think, well, I got a lot of experience, so I'm bound to be making some good decisions now, you know? Anyway, that's all I got for you today. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, and please leave your ideas, thoughts in the comments. I love reading them. Thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay healthy, and if you can, stay single.